Hello, I'm Marianne from Patchwork Training, and at Patchwork Training we teach agility to all ages, all breeds, so your dog, even if it's not 12 months old, we can still do some stuff ready for when they're old enough to do agility. We don't actually do jumping or contact work before they're 12 months because bones and joints are not fully formed, they still need time to grow, and the dog also needs time to have fun. So what we do is we take them from quite a young age and we just teach them the basics away from the agility equipment. We can teach things like the weight, which is really essential for agility. We can teach them how to do circles, how to stay with you when you're running, because when you're running the dog will often run behind you, and in agility obviously you don't want the dog to run behind you. We can teach them how to turn left and right, teach them how to go for a toy, which if you've got the toy in front of you, then later on when you're sending them forwards for the toy, you can actually pop a jump there, so they're going over the jump. So they're quite happy to do these things, and as far as they're concerned, they're just having fun, even though we're actually training them. We can also teach them proprioception exercises, which basically means the dog knows where their paws are going. We also need to teach them how to weight shift. We want them to have their weight on their back end. When they're coming down the seesaw or the dog walk or the A-frame, we don't want them coming down at full speed because we don't want all that weight on their shoulders. We want the dog to actually put its weight onto its back end where it is much, much stronger. So to do that, we would do quite a few different exercises. You could play tug with your dog, and when they're pulling, their bottom's in the air, tugging against you, they're in the correct position for putting their weight on their back end. Another good exercise that we do is walking them along the pole. Let's have a look. Now this is quite a frustrating exercise if you haven't done it before, because we want the dog to walk along the pole with their left feet on one side and the right feet on the other. Sounds simple? Mary, come. So we need to do this really quite slowly so that the dog keeps their legs evenly each side. Good girl. So if you keep your hand down low, Mary, the dog will keep their neck down quite low rather than looking up at you. Good girl. So she walked along there quite nicely. That helps keep her back end nice and straight. When they've done that and they're quite happy doing that, we ask them then to reverse. Okay, so we wouldn't do the whole pole to start with. We would just perhaps come here and then just ask them to reverse. Good girl. So they're learning how to use their back end independently of their front end. So we just take them along the pole and just reverse. Good girl. What we want them to do is to learn how to reverse before they go on the pole. So a good way to do that is to bring them through a little alleyway, just so that you can keep them in a straight line. And if you just walk towards them, good girl. If you keep your hand quite low to reverse. Good. And you can do that as many times as you like. When they're happy doing that, we also need them to be happy walking on different surfaces. There we come. So if we get them, good, to stand on the little book, good girl. Now I want her back end to be really flexible, so if I walk towards her, see how her back end is walking away from me. Really happy to do it. And obviously do it both sides. Good girl. So she's using her back end separately from her front end. Another exercise we could do here is pop her into a sit, keeping the front paws on the book, and into a stand. Sit, stand. Good. And what this does, if you notice, she's not moving her front feet, she's just popping up her back end, which helps build up the muscles in the back end. Sit, stand. Good. And then when they get really clever, they can come forwards and reverse onto it. Good girl. Good. Come forwards and reverse. So she's having to lift her back paws onto the book. Okay, that's again, it's all helping them to be quite agile. Forwards and reverse. Good girl. And when they're happy just on a flat book, all this is is just a book with tape so that it's quite solid. So now we'd move on to a wibble wobble cushion. Okay, so when she puts her paws on there now, if you'll see, it moves. That helps with her balance. It also helps with her building up her muscles. So as she's moving on there, her front legs are moving with her. So that will help when she's going onto the seesaw, so that when she gets on the seesaw and it moves, she's not frightened by it. Again, we could do the walk round on here. Good girl. And we can walk around this way. Good. Yes, good girl. Very clever. And again, we could do the front and reverse on there. Reverse. Good girl. So she's got to lift her paws onto it. Good girl. So clever. Reverse. Good. Good girl. Okay. And as you can see, they love doing this exercise because they get rewarded. They like to repeat it. So what we can do now is we can have front feet on one, back feet on another. Okay. So they're both at different heights. One's wobbly and the other one's quite firm. Good girl. And if you reward them on it, they like to stay on it. Very good girl. Good. And release off. You have to release because she does love working on it. Another little exercise that we can do to help, Mary. Yes, that's very clever. Come is pop them into a sit. Now this will help when we start doing our rear crosses, which of course we'll do away from the jumps to start with. So pop them into a sit. If you step back, they turn their head. Reward. Okay, pop them into a sit. Step back. Oh, Mary. If they get it wrong, go back and start again. Wait. Yes, good girl. So this time I'm going to go behind her and you watch her head. Yes, good girl. So she turns her head towards me this side. And again, if I go the other way, yes, good girl. So I'm rewarding her for following my body language. So eventually, when she's going over a jump and I'm crossing behind her, she's going to look to see where I'm going. And these are little exercises you can do at home, in your garden, out on your walk. You don't need any great equipment. Good girl. There we go. Good. Okay. Now, another exercise that we can do with the cones. We like to make use of lots of cones. We need the dog to be happy on our left and on our right. So we can just take her through the cones. Good girl, that's very clever. And now have her on the other side. Good girl, that's so clever. And of course she's staying with me here and she's learning to turn with me. Good girl. And you can do that quite often. That helps with their lead work as well as it helps you with the agility, because when they're going to do the jumps later on, we want the dog to stay on one side or the other. We don't want them going behind you. Good girl. Okay. So let's have a little look at some poles. We have poles on the ground. We don't introduce jumps at this stage. So to start with, we would take the dog with us. So, okay, let's go. Yes, good girl, yes. So she was quite happy just trotting along those poles. The poles are at different angles. They're not all in a straight line, so that makes the dog think about where they're putting their feet. Okay, sit. Okay, so you can have them come with you. Okay. Yes, good girl. And of course, again, everything we do on the left, we have to do on the right. Yes, good girl. So we need the good sit and wait. Wait. Okay. Yes, good girl. So you can see that she's starting to think about where her feet are going. So then we could also do a little circle. So to start with, we would have the dog on the outside because it's easier for them. There we go. Good girl. And of course we do it both ways. Yeah, good girl. That's so clever. Yeah, so you can see that they're walking around on the outside. They again have to think about where they're putting their feet. So then we make it a bit harder for them and they have to walk on the inside. Mary, come. Good. So of course the poles are closer together, so they really have to think about where their feet are. Good girl. Good. And of course doing it the other way. Mary, come. This way. Yes, good girlie. There we go. Good. Yeah, good. Now the reason that we teach dogs to be aware of their back end is because most dogs just wander along, front legs, back end just follows along. They don't even think about their back end moving independently, but we want the dogs to be happy when they're going over jumps, not to drop their back end and clip the poles as they go over, or when they're turning circles to drop their back leg because they're just going around the corner very awkwardly. Also, it makes the dog's muscles in their back end much stronger. We don't want them to come falling off the seesaw or the dog walk, which they could possibly do if they're not in control of all of their paws. They need to understand where their paws are at all times, and they need to understand that they are in control of them. When we're doing things like front turns and rear crosses, the dog needs to know which paw to land on when they're going over a jump. When they're in the air, they already know which paw they're going to land on, and that depends on your position. So if you've taught your dog to be aware of all their paws, of what they're doing, then you will make their job much easier for them. Okay, another good thing to make them agile, Mary, come, is teaching the turns. Okay, close and back. Good. And that really helps their body, especially when they're going to do tight turns around the jumps and the weaves, because they will be weaving in and out of the poles and they need to be really supple. So they need to do these exercises quite regularly so that they grow up being quite supple and healthy dogs, but with good strong muscles in their back end. Another good thing is when you're playing with a toy, when you're throwing the toy, don't always throw it ahead of you, throw it to the left or to the right, and that will help with your left and right directional commands. And also it helps the dog that they're not always trying to go in a straight line. We can start training our puppies really from the day you bring them home. You obviously start teaching them things like sit and wait, which are all good things for working towards agility. Things like the poles and the wobble cushions and things, you would wait a few months before you would start teaching those, and probably around about 8 or 9 months start teaching the poles on the ground over there. Things like the wobble cushion, they can start fairly quickly, 15 weeks, but everything is done just for literally a couple of minutes at a time. And then obviously as they grow older, you can do it for a few more minutes and start adding a few more of the exercises in. You're not doing serious training. It is just a little game that you're playing with your dog. They don't even realise you're training. You can certainly get this little book out and start practicing this, because this is only just off the ground. So just getting your dog to even look at it, because some dogs are quite wary, and certainly when you move on to the wobble cushion, they won't all go onto it straight away. Just get them to come and just sniff at it, or even just touch it with one paw. Things like the lead walking, of course you can do that whenever, because that can be at home in your kitchen, and you sit and you're down and stuff, that you can do each day. But don't push your puppy. They're there to have fun and they're there to grow. So we've got plenty of time. Hopefully they have a long life. They don't need to do everything, certainly in the first 6 months. So just take it very, very slowly, and just add one thing in at a time.